Hi guys, and welcome back to What Is This Weapon? I'm Jonathan, and this, barely fitting on the table because it is a traditional military service weapon of the 19th century, as you probably guessed, walnut blued steel, is one of the Burton patent rifles. So this is mid-19th century, and I'll tell you right out the gate, this is a trials weapon. So there's a real flurry, certainly Britain probably more than anywhere else. It's the biggest empire on earth at this point. So it is putting all of its attention on the small arms side, coming up to the, well, mid-1860s on trying to solicit as many of the best designs as possible for the next service rifle. So 1864, that's the year when the Snider rifle is adopted. It's a stopgap design. They've chopped a door into the back of the old patent 1853 Enfield muzzle loading rifle, and it's perfectly serviceable, but it's never intended for ongoing service. They want something purpose-built, breech loading, ideally more accurate, certainly a lot faster to load. The old breech block thing, having to flip it over to eject the case, wasn't ideal, but as it would happen, the Snider would soldier on for quite some time, especially in the colonies. But so this is a design, one of two main designs by James Henry Burton, an American, who we'll go into a bit of detail on in just a moment. I want to show you the gun first, just so you know what it is that we're dealing with. So as I say, or as I implied, right from the muzzle, including the caliber, by the way, 5.77 caliber, 0.577 of an inch, quite big. That's the service cartridge. In fact, that is the service cartridge there. It's actually, despite appearances, it is a thin brass case with a cardboard outer and then a brass and iron case head. And essentially the previous muzzle loading bullet, re-engineered, adapted to a cartridge. So you stick the whole thing in, the ignition is integral to the cartridge case, you know the drill, self-contained metallic cartridges, the way forward. Still how we do it today. So that's all the same, back to, including the rear sights, the barrel bands, the furniture pretty much, all the way back to the breech section, and then even the butt stock and the butt plate and everything, that's all P53/Snider Enfield as well. It's this is where the magic happens, this is where the better mousetrap can be built, as it were, and there are so many different ways of engineering a way to seal up the breech so no gas escapes, but also to quickly open it up to eject an empty case, shove in a new one, and carry on firing. So not magazine stuff yet, but very, faster, better, more accurate, hopefully, breech loading rifles is what the British are after in 1864. In fact, they put out a sort of solicitation, which we have a note of here. So the British government in April 1864 says, "We invite all gun makers and others to submit proposals for breech loading rifles, either repeating or not repeating, which may replace the present service rifles in future manufacture." And we'll come back to the trials in a moment. I want to get back to James Henry Burton, whose name appears on this, on the butt there. So this is to do with the trials, it's kind of spoilers, but this is submitted for those trials. And so they identify it by the maker, and in this case, also by the number. Now, that's because James Henry Burton submits two designs. He's the only one in the trials to have two designs working their way through, with two different mechanical approaches, which we'll show you once I've explained a bit about James Henry Burton, for those of you who haven't heard of him. He's actually a pretty significant figure in both America and the UK. So Burton is born in 1823. Incidentally, I'm not going to give you the whole biography of James Henry Burton here. There's an excellent lecture also on YouTube by my friend Logan of High Caliber History, where he goes into, gives the whole of Burton's life story, basically. And it's a fascinating story. There's also a book that covers his whole life story. You might want to check that out too. So we'll just give you the highlights where it's relevant here. But he is born in 1823, just as a basic start. He ends up working at the Harper's Ferry Arsenal, quite a famous armory in the United States. Ends up fairly quickly running the place and then gets demoted due to some political machinations that I'll let Logan explain on his channel. and then jumps ship to Springfield Armoury, and he's also working on the side at the Ames company, a private arms company as well. And this is indicative of his whole career. He's kind of jumping around across the pond, back and forth, and then around the two countries as well. He never stays at any one particular role for that long, which I think is interesting in terms of his personality and his skill set and all of that. But in 1855, he gets headhunted by the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield. It's been around for about 40 years already by that point, and it's already using water power from the river. It's already a factory, but it's not the factory that we think of as the Enfield factory yet. That comes with the mass production of the patent 1853 muzzle-loading rifle, and in particular, achieving that on an interchangeable level, where some nincompoop like me can just grab a part from a parts bin, screw it onto the gun and send it down the line. How we make everything today, mass production, lines of some skilled workers, but also less skilled workers who can just screw stuff together. Absolutely critical engineering needs to go into the product, in this case a gun, to allow that to happen. And James Henry Burton is instrumental in that. Procuring the machinery, setting up all the contacts, using his own engineering nous to set all this up, and he has various patents that are lodged during that time. And he actually takes a salary drop from, I think Logan adjusts it to $33,000 working at Springfield Armoury, down to only $19,000 a year working here in the UK. So interesting that he took such a cut to come and work in Britain. So as superintendent at Enfield, he for 5 years, he took he signed a contract for 5 years to do this job with the option to go permanent. Spoilers, he doesn't. He does the 5 years. And he achieves the 0.003 of an inch tolerances required to produce the patent 1853 Enfield from 1856 onwards in interchangeable form. It also has the advantage of if a weapon breaks, it may not help the soldier in the field, but when it comes back, the replacement part will just drop on. You don't have to have somebody file it and test fit and file it and eventually hand fit it. It's with the P53, Britain goes from using American know-how and American machinery, literally from the States, made there, from making everything in essentially a glorified form of handicrafts to interchangeable parts. Now, the British were at this a few decades earlier, as Professor David Williams has shed a lot of light on recently. So there was an earlier achievement of interchangeable firearms parts, but it's Burton, using the American system, that really nails it. Now, he's also designing firearms. So in 1858, he comes up with a breech-loading carbine design, looking at British trials that are happening, that were about to happen there for breech-loading carbines. We have one of those in a different building, and it's not the one we're here to talk about today, but he is at it. So the 5 years end at Enfield, he claims ill health, but it actually seems like he's deliberately returning to his home state of Virginia, in the full knowledge that that state is going to secede from the Union and the American Civil War is going to kick off, and they need their own means of producing arms. So he goes back to help them restart the Virginia Armoury. Having done sort of that here in the UK at Enfield, he's going to go and do it from scratch this time, back in Virginia. Now, at the point of leaving, quite interestingly, local connection for where our headquarters here is based. In 1860, one of his machinery patents lists him as from Loudoun, Virginia, Loudoun County, but currently sojourning in Leeds, England. So he was here when he was working on some of his machinery designs. Now, the Virginia Armoury does not go particularly well. They build most of the building, and it ends up having to be torn down because the small matter of the American Civil War happens, and Henry is on the wrong side. Now, he gets a pardon, so he's able to sort of go about his business afterwards, but the whole armoury plan in Virginia is, for obvious reasons, definitely not happening now. So he leaves the United States anyway, even though he has been pardoned, and ends up back in the UK, right in the perfect time slot to be entering rifles into the new British Army breech-loading rifle trials. Now, although the initial solicitation is April 1864, they don't get organised until 1867, and so that's when Burton submits his number 1 and his number 2. So as far as the British government's concerned, or the British War Office, we have only Burton number 1 and Burton number 2. Now, there are other variations and other completely different designs by Burton, of course. And in fact, in the course of researching this, so let me show you what they thought of as number 1. External hammer, and there's a firing pin piston, a bit like a Snyder, built into the breech block here. 2 triggers. It's always a little bamboozling when there are 2 triggers, but in this case it faces backwards and it unlocks the breech, which then drops down out the way. Quite slick compared to some of these 1860s breech loading trials rifles. We could do a whole series just on those. We have so many, and they're all different. So there is a great big locking catch there that's part of that trigger lever. You can see it sticking out there. So that very securely locks that action shut, keeping it sealed. You don't want hot, high pressure gas escaping from the breech for the sake of the shooter's face and for the sake of losing gas pressure that's pushing the bullet down the barrel. You want consistent, high velocity as you can, with essentially a very large 5.77 caliber bullet, traveling relatively slowly, but still you want to keep it all locked in here, and you don't want gas cutting to wear out the action. Lots of reasons to get that nice and tight, and that lockup is helping with that. Firing pin is on the face there of the breech, and the back end of the firing pin, as I say, is there. So fairly mechanically simple. It's just a floating firing pin, no spring. So you insert your cartridge, I believe the Snyder cartridge, although this very gingerly tried to fit it and it doesn't fit. I believe this would take Snyder rounds. Anyway, shove that in there, close it up, full cock and fire. So not bad, but it's not crank it like a Winchester or something, or even a Martini with no hammer to cock. Open it up, round in, close it, fire it. It takes an extra step, and then it's a little unwieldy. So this is Burton's number 1. Now, at the Cody Firearms Museum, the excellent Cody Firearms Museum, we had a video with them the other week you might want to check out, with something very different to this. They have stuff going way back as well, all the way to the present. Check them out if you're in Wyoming. Anywhere in the state of Wyoming, get over there and go to the Cody Firearms Museum. They have what I'm going to call today the number 0, or the number 0, which is this design to the patent of 1866 that's referenced on the breech here, by the way. Worth showing you the engraving there. This is colour case hardened, by the way. It's faded a bit, but you can still make out the sort of oil slick colours. So the patent of 1866, to which this refers, a year before the actual submission of the design. And what Cody have, because they don't have British trials rifles, they have whatever Burton was up to stateside, their version doesn't have the latch. It just has a half cock, pull down on the lever, and it opens up. Now that seems like the simpler option, simpler design, and therefore that would come later, but it looks from the timeline like that's actually the original. That's what's patented. This has been added for additional lockup, additional security. So this would appear to be the improved version of what the Brits call number 1. So number 0 over at Cody, should be able to roll in a shot of that for you so you can see the difference. But it looks like this without the trigger in the guard, and it matches the patent. And that, by the way, is patent number 850, February the 10th, 1866. Cody also have one of these with the trigger release. Ours is serial. I'm going to call it serial number. It could be a trials number, but there weren't this many made for trials. This one's 23. I believe, I suspect that this is a rolling number for Burton patent rifles of any kind, possibly carbines as well. We actually have number 1, or what would appear to be number 1, identical to this, but with number 1 on it. That would appear to be what that number means. That's my best guess. Now, at this point, I will grab number 2, because it's quite different. Here is Burton's number 2, not marked up number 2, interestingly, or with the name Burton, but by default, this has to be the other entry, or one of the other entries. So 2 different patterns entered by Burton, and he, after the initial phase of the trial, he has to go away and make 6 of each. So they actually win. He wins well, he passes the first round. One of only 37 of 102 entrants to actually meet the requirements of the trial. So he then has to go, his reward is a load more work. He has to go away and make, or have made, 6 more of each of the lever operated version and this, the number 2, the bolt operated version. So rather than a hammer, we still have to first cock the weapon using this cocking piece, and it is essentially, it's like those early bolt actions like the needle gun. And we pull the lever over and we open the breech that way. There's a great big long extractor in here. And the calibers drop down to 50 caliber. I suspect, and we haven't been able to yet do a chamber cast on this, I suspect that's US 50-70 caliber cartridge type. But we need to confirm that. But it would make sense. Drop that in there, close this up behind it. Nice and secure lock up. It's already cocked. You pull the trigger, which we won't do. We'll drop that striker like that. And the locking lug is here, great big locking lug. It enters through the aperture at this angle here. Show you that again quickly, in case you missed it. So it comes in off center like that, goes into the sort of receiver ring there, and then locks over quite positively. And then it's essentially a striker-fired design. And this is not, it's not marked in the same way, Burton number 2, but it is marked on the receiver, on the action ring up here, J.H. Burton, patent 1867. So similar marking to the number 1. And it's got London proof marks on it. Pretty standard markings, and again, it is essentially P53 or Snyder, but with a different breech action. So the details of these trials are in Tom Heptonstall's excellent PhD thesis at the University of Hull. He did a load of work here, actually worked here in fact, and went away and did an excellent PhD thesis that covers the whole story of these trials and the bit either side. And so the Burtons appear in that. And he's got all the stats and the results of the trials and the different phases. So we'll link you his thesis rather than me rabbiting on. But I will give you the criteria. So these two both passed these criteria. These were less than 9 pounds 5 ounces in weight, less than 51 inches overall length, greater or equal to or greater than, or no less than, 12 rounds per minute rate of fire. Just about see from me operating these how that would be achievable. That's essentially what they calculated the rate of fire of the Snyder to be, give or take. It was done as an average. So they had to at least meet the standard of the Snyder, which is a low bar when you think that they're going for a scratch design action. Albeit, you could potentially look at some conversion program, maybe, given that they're keeping a lot of the furniture, the barrel, the external details, but the intention was a scratch design. And Burton gets 2 of the 9 finalists, so he's doing really well by this point in 1867. He's entered 2 designs, hedging his bets over whether they want bolt action or a lever type action, and he gets both through to phase 2. Now, it's not actually as rosy as it looks, because none of the rifles entered are really doing that well. The Snyder's kind of beating them or is as good as them in most areas. That said, Burton's 2 designs were in the top 3 for accuracy. But again, it was not the accuracy that the War Office had been hoping for. And so the trial is kind of going in a it's gone well so far. He's got the money to go away and make 12 trials rifles, but it goes downhill pretty rapidly. Also worth noting that although this ended up not being a magazine rifle trial, they were open to magazine rifles in this trial. By repeater, that's what they meant. They meant something with a magazine on board to chamber and cycle through cartridges, but none of the 102 applicants were magazine rifles. That would have to wait. So ultimately, the Alexander Henry rifle gets, wins the trial, gets the £600 next stage prize, but no one gets the £1,000 prize for, yes, this is going to be the next service rifle for the British military. Go away and develop it. No one gets that. So Henry is declared the winner, even though there's some question as to how that's been achieved. Something about secret lubrication of cartridges came up. check out Tom's PhD. So Burton has kind of failed, but so has everyone else. Now there's a new round of trials in 1869 to try to revisit this that he doesn't submit for, but he does refine his bolt action. And it's dated patent 1868, and there is an improved patent for this. So very briefly, he just seems to have made the whole thing a lot more robust. So we have this great big long locking lug. There were issues with various rifles with cartridges bursting and actions not being strong enough. So I suspect this is to satisfy that. And it's quite reminiscent of some later 19th century design. So this looks quite promising. Different extractor setup as well. However, this was not entered. So ultimately what comes out of these trials is that they like Alexander Henry's form of rifling. That's got the best accuracy potential and a smaller bullet as well. And so that gets married to a refined version of Friedrich von Martini's action, and we get the Martini-Henry approved in 1871. Not too much later than that next round of trials in 1869. And that's a real success story. But unfortunately, that means a lot of things go by the wayside. So I don't know how discouraged Burton was after this, but whatever happens, he left the country, he goes back to the United States, but this time he decides to become a farmer. That doesn't pan out for him. He tries it twice, but it still doesn't pan out for him. And he ends up coming back to the UK again in 1871, and then again in 1877 at Greenwood and Batley, another Yorkshire-based British engineering manufacturing firm, famous for making ammunition, among other things. Burton lives quite a long life. He goes on, he dies eventually in 1894. He's not ultimately a household name like Lee and Enfield. Well, Enfield, of course, a huge household name, but he's not an individual famous name like James Paris Lee in small arms development, but he's hugely significant in the manufacturing stuff that underpins all of that. So this is sort of a side story before the Martini-Henry, but his involvement both in the arsenals in the United States and basically turning the Royal Small Arms factory into the factory that we know from the later periods, the factory that made the Martini-Henry, that made the Lee series rifles, that made the Bren gun, the SLR, and the factory even that made the SA-80. So he doesn't build it, but he sets it up as a modern mass manufacture facility, which is what it remained until it closed after the SA-80 production line initially closed down. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to do the usual YouTube stuff. I know I don't always remember to say it, but liking, sharing, and subscribing as well, with YouTube being a little bit perplexing sometimes as to what it does with videos with guns in. You will probably want to subscribe to make sure that you get all of these. Check out our website, our social media accounts as well. And I'd just like to give a shout out to the Lithgow Small Arms Museum over in Australia. They are going through some very tough times at the moment. They are closed. There were some thefts. They need money to bring their security up to standard. So head over to their website, link in the description to that, or you can Google Lithgow Small Arms Museum. Please do what you can to help them out. They are our counterpart collection down there in Australia, and we really want to see them come back. But whatever you do, join us again here next week.